Thank you for staying with us on World Now. We are talking about the fall of Bashir al-Assad as leader of Syria. After the sudden collapse of the Syrian government, President Joe Biden of the U.S. says his country will try to bring home one of the longest-held American hostages. Speaking at the White House, President Biden said the U.S. believes Austin Tice is alive, but they must pinpoint his location in the war-torn country. Mr. Tice, a freelance journalist, is thought to have been taken captive near Damascus on the 14th of August 2012 while he was covering the country's civil war. President Biden describes al-Assad's exit as a fundamental act of justice and a moment of risk and uncertainty for the Middle East. Our guest, a global affairs analyst, Ambrose Igboke, is back now. Dr. Igboke, let's talk about the implication of Bashir al-Assad's fall. President Joe Biden has in one breath said it's a fundamental act of justice and a moment of risk and uncertainty for the Middle East. What's the implication for this Middle East, which seems embroiled in conflict over time?
Well, I think President Biden just summarized it aptly. For now, we don't know what will happen in the Middle East. Remember that the fight in Syria was a multifaceted one. There were rebel groups from every corner. There were the ones backed by different groups. There were the ones backed by various interests, while Iran and Russia backed the regime of Assad. Now, the ones that came into Damascus and captured the city and were, nailed the final nail on Assad were mostly of that had fundamentalists who have roots from Al-Qaeda. And if they have a root from Al-Qaeda, then the Middle East, we need to be concerned, because what kind of regime will they impose on their own? Remember that Syria is not like any other unified or unilateral cultural zone. Syria are made up of a lot of people. They are made up of different sects of Islam. There are Christians there. And there are people of diverse cultural heritage in Syria. So Syria is not homogeneous, and therefore, if a group like that has roots like Al-Qaeda, like what has happened, is potentially going to take over, what then happens? Are they going to be hardliners? Are they going to make everybody succumb? Israel is also worried because of the Golan Heights. Israel is worried also that a hardcore fundamentalist in Syria may not have the moderating influence that Assad has. Assad is not a hardliner, except when it comes to using force on his people. But when you talk of doctrina, or when you talk of other kind of affiliations, he's not there. So Israel is also concerned, and Syria plays a very fundamental role in the Middle East. Now, also that Iran has lost some of its power, where will be their next concentration? Are they going to ensure that Hezbollah is emboldened more, or the Houthi rebels that are operating at sea? So it's a time of deep upheaval for the South, for the Middle East, and we are looking forward to the developments that will happen in the following days.
All right, let's talk about Russia's involvement. It has 2 air bases in Syria, and over time, at least a period of 9 years, it has conducted airstrikes on targets it's called terrorists. And with the fall of Assad, we understand that it has granted asylum to the Assad family.
Well, Russia has never hidden the fact that they are friends of the Assad family, especially Bashir. What has happened, even remember the time Donald Trump just came in some 4 years earlier when he became president. There were some kind of impasse in the in the Syrian war, and it was jet fighters of Russia that actually went to bomb some locations. Even as of 2 weeks ago, even last week, there were still bombings by Russia. But I think Russia has been weighed down because of the war in Ukraine, and they are now bogged down by the expenses they are racking up. They don't have enough men. They ever had to bring in mercenaries to fight the war in Ukraine. So Russia is wearied, and I don't think they have the kind of resources anymore to sustain that family. So I think that with their options, and they kind of soft pedal, and they allowed the rebels to take over, because Russia still has the technical, ability militarily to be able to defeat those, the mercenaries or those rebels. But there are too many rebels on too many fronts, and they also can't dissipate their energy in terms of their hardware, even their finances. They don't have that anymore. They have to concentrate on the war in Ukraine. So I think for a soft landing, they took the Assad family come and they granted them political asylum. And I think they can just live out their lives there over there. And one does not know if Russia will back them back, because sometimes we are also seeing historically where people go on exile like this, and then after some years, they cause trouble in their home country and then foment trouble and find a way of coming back. So the Syrian people have also to watch against that, because if, for example, Russia settles this war with Ukraine, we lead storm to Syria again and see what it can do. So now everybody is a little bit just tight-lipped. They're watching the situation. And then from the release that Russia gave, Russia is also, I think, may have a hand in what may go on in transition in Syria. And they said that in talks with the rebels and talk with the prime minister, and I want to see how the transition will go. I think Russia will also have a key part to play in the transitions in the coming days.
And the people of Syria are at the very heart of what is happening. Talk about what this could degenerate into. It seems unclear just yet, but then that uncertainty is burdensome. How can world bodies step in? We understand already that the UN Security Council is due to assemble because Russia has said, okay, you need to really talk about what happens next in Syria. Are you concerned about this?
Well, I don't know if the UN is ready to have boots on ground, or if the UN is ready to set up a military outpost, just like what they did in Mali, what they did in South Sudan. But, surprisingly, all the places the UN has had its forces, even in Gaza, between Gaza and Israel, it has not stopped anything from happening. So I'm really skeptical about whether UN is going to do some resolutions, whether they're going to go vote for boots on ground, whether they're going to have some military expedition in Syria. Those have not solved any problem in where the UN has had expeditions. So even if it happens here, we will know. I think what they can do now is to see whether they will quickly convoke a meeting of the warring factions in Syria, the people who made Al-Assad leave, and then also the warring factor, the other warring faction. See how you can get them together quickly on a round table so that they can share power, they can have a transition government, they can form their political party, and then they can be like a transition committee for maybe the next 3 months or 4 months, or as maybe set up a timetable, let the people go to the ballots and determine, let the Syrians vote for them. But they need to put a transition quickly in place that we can form a coalition of the different rebel groups. In that way, they can now see whether they can now monitor a transition, monitored by the United Nations. But if they want to do it militarily, I think it will not work.
Global Affairs Analyst Dr. Ambrose Igboke, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us on World Now.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Well, let's move on from there.